10 moments where a crown, a confession, or one failed plot redirected a kingdom. This countdown moves from number 10 to number 1, with each archive leading into the next. We begin with the shipwreck that triggered a succession crisis. One royal shipwreck erased the expected future of England. The White Ship left Barfleur for England on the night of the 25th of November 1120. William Adelin, the only legitimate son of King Henry I, was aboard. The vessel struck a submerged rock shortly after leaving the harbour. Almost everyone aboard died, including many members of the Anglo-Norman elite. Only one person is traditionally recorded as surviving the wreck. William's death created the succession crisis that later fueled the anarchy. The archive kept the evidence even after the witnesses were gone. A succession crisis at sea leads to an emperor trying to save his authority in the snow. At number 9, the emperor who waited barefoot in the snow. An emperor stood outside a castle while a pope decided his fate. Pope Gregory VII excommunicated Emperor Henry IV during the investiture controversy. German princes threatened to replace Henry unless he received absolution. Henry crossed the Alps during the winter of 1077 to reach Canossa. He waited outside the castle for 3 days in a public act of penance. Gregory lifted the excommunication, but their political struggle soon resumed. Going to Canossa became a phrase for humiliating submission to an opponent. Its strangest detail is also the reason the story survived. Canossa was political theatre. The next crisis turned a disputed succession into open civil war. At number 8, the Civil War where law nearly vanished. A disputed crown turned England into a generation-long power struggle. The anarchy was a civil war in England and Normandy between 1138 and 1153 which resulted in a widespread breakdown in law and order. The conflict was a war of succession precipitated by the accidental death of William Adelin, the only legitimate son of King Henry I, who drowned in the White Ship disaster of 1120. Henry then sought to leave the English throne to his daughter, Empress Matilda, but was only partially successful in convincing the nobility to support her. On Henry's death in 1135, his nephew Stephen of Blois seized the throne with the help of his brother Henry of Blois, Bishop of Winchester. History remembered it because the ordinary rules failed so visibly. From armies fighting over a crown, we move to two heirs who simply disappeared. At number 7, the two princes who disappeared in the Tower. Two royal boys vanished, and the mystery became political ammunition. The Princes in the Tower refers to the mystery of the fate of the deposed English King Edward V and his younger brother Prince Richard, Duke of York, heirs to the throne of King Edward IV. The brothers were the only surviving sons of the king by his queen, Elizabeth Woodville, and were aged 12 and 9 years old, respectively, at the time of their father's death in 1483. They were lodged in the Tower of London by their paternal uncle and England's regent, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, in preparation for Edward V's forthcoming coronation. Before the young king's coronation, however, he and his brother were declared illegitimate by Parliament. The fact stayed unusual enough that the legend barely needed help. A dark mystery inside the tower gives way to diplomacy staged as a festival of impossible luxury. At number 6, the summit built to outshine a rival king. Two kings turned diplomacy into a competition of tents, fountains, and gold. The Field of the Cloth of Gold was a summit meeting between King Henry VIII of England and King Francis I of France from 7 to the 24th of June 1520. Held at Baillingham, between Ardres in France and Gouines in the English Pale of Calais, it was an opulent display of wealth by both kings. The summit was arranged to increase the bond of friendship between the two kings following the Anglo-French Treaty of 1514. The two monarchs would meet again in 1532 to arrange Francis's assistance in pressuring Pope Clement VII to pronounce Henry's first marriage as illegitimate. That is the kind of detail history hides in plain sight. Royal spectacle leads to Renaissance violence when assassins strike during Mass. At number 5, the cathedral assassination that failed. Assassins struck the Medici during Easter Mass inside Florence Cathedral. The Pazzi family and powerful allies plotted against Florence's ruling Medici brothers. The attack came during Easter Mass in Florence Cathedral in 1478. Giuliano de' Medici was killed, while Lorenzo escaped with wounds. Florentine crowds rallied to the Medici instead of supporting the conspirators. Several plotters were captured and executed within hours. The failed coup strengthened Lorenzo's control and triggered a wider Italian war. The archive kept the evidence even after the witnesses were gone. The failed cathedral coup becomes a citywide revolution built around an apocalyptic promise. At number 4, the city taken over by an apocalyptic commune. A radical movement seized the city and announced a new Jerusalem. Radical Anabaptists took control of the German city of Munster in 1534. Opponents were expelled while adult rebaptism became compulsory. Jan van Leyden declared himself king and introduced a harsh new order. The city's prince-bishop surrounded Munster and cut off supplies. Famine and betrayal ended the rebellion when troops entered in 1535. Iron cages that held the executed leaders still hang from St. Lambert's Church. Its strangest detail is also the reason the story survived. Religious takeover gives way to unpaid soldiers tearing through the center of Catholic Europe. At number 3, the mutinous army that sacked Rome. Unpaid imperial troops stormed Rome and shattered Renaissance confidence. Charles V only intended to threaten military action to make Pope Clement VII come to his terms. However, the imperial army were largely unpaid and mutinied. Despite being ordered not to storm Rome, they broke into the scarcely defended city and began looting, killing, and holding citizens for ransom without any restraint. Clement VII took refuge in Castel Sant'Angelo after the Swiss Guard were annihilated in a delaying rearguard action. He remained there until a ransom was paid to the pillagers. History remembered it because the ordinary rules failed so visibly. Open violence becomes coded espionage as secret letters are turned against a captive queen. At number 2, the coded letters that condemned a queen. Secret letters were intercepted, decoded, and used to trap Mary Stuart. The Babington Plot was a plan in 1586 to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I, a Protestant, and put Mary, Queen of Scots, her Catholic cousin, on the English throne. It led to Mary's execution, a result of a letter sent by Mary in which she consented to the assassination of Elizabeth. The long-term goal of the plot was the invasion of England by the Spanish forces of King Philip II and the Catholic League in France, leading to the restoration of the old religion. The plot was discovered by Elizabeth's spymaster Sir Francis Walsingham and used to entrap Mary for the purpose of removing her as a claimant to the English throne. The fact stayed unusual enough that the legend barely needed help. The countdown closes with another assassination plan, this time hidden beside a king's travel route. At number 1, the assassination plot hidden beside a road. A plan to ambush a king became a weapon against his opponents. The Rye House Plot of 1683 was a plan to assassinate King Charles II of England and his brother, and heir to the throne, James, Duke of York. Historians vary in their assessment of the degree to which details of the conspiracy were finalized. Whatever the state of the assassination plot, plans to mount a rebellion against the Stuart monarchy were being entertained by some opposition leaders in England. The government cracked down hard on those in a series of state trials, accompanied with repressive measures and widespread searches for arms. That is the kind of detail history hides in plain sight. That was top 10 medieval power struggles that changed kingdoms. Every story in this countdown began as a shorter archive, but the connections only appear when the files are placed together. Subscribe for the next collection.